Hi, this is Brian with ActiveMelody.com. This week's guitar lesson is all about becoming a better rhythm player. If you were looking at a chord chart and you saw a G chord, what can you do besides just playing a G down in first position? What are some other things you can do, some embellishments, some different voicings and all of that? And that's what this lesson is all about. It's just to give you ideas for different ways that you might think about approaching rhythm. So I've got the lesson split into two parts. In this video, we'll take a look at the first half. If you'd like to watch the second half, download the tablature and get the MP3 jam tracks, which I have in 2 tempos, and that's really important for this lesson. You can get those things by going to ActiveMelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, do a search for EP343. Alright, so I made this lesson for those of you that are interested in becoming better rhythm players, and that's something we should all do. Most of the time as a guitar player, you're going to be playing rhythm, especially if you're playing in a band. It's like 85, 90% of the time you're playing rhythm. You know, while there's a vocalist doing their thing and all of that, you might step up and play lead at 10-15% of the time, but the rest of the time you're playing rhythm. So what can you do to sound interesting? And it's a common problem that we have as guitar players. We tend to focus on the fun stuff, which is all the lead stuff. And a lot of guitar players are great lead players, but then when it comes to rhythm, they start to fall apart. So we're going to go back to what you need to know first, which is rhythm. And then your leads will improve too, because you'll start to be able to pull leads out of these chord voicings and all of that. So let's start with this. If I were to tell you to play a D chord, most of us, myself included, as guitar players, we think about a D chord like this. If you just saw it on a chord chart, that might be the first place you go. But what I want you to start thinking about, instead of playing just a D chord like that, what are some other things you can do? Some different voicings and some different ways that you can play that D chord. Now, when I played, that's not a D chord at all, and some people might argue that that's even playing lead, and maybe it is, but it's still a cousin of the D chord. And so when I see a D chord, I start to think of all these possibilities I can do as a rhythm player. So, and a lot of it is playing harmonized thirds, like I was just playing there, or playing triads. And so the key to the whole thing to me is playing triads and harmonized thirds and then combining those two. You have this powerful combination that goes all over the fretboard. So let's talk about this song. So this song is played in the key of G. It's got 3 chords, basic G, C, D chords. These are not complicated at all. It starts with the 1 chord. So you have your G, then it goes to the 5 chord, which is the D. Stays there for a minute. Then we go back to the G. So that's what we're going to start with. That's what the chords look like, but how boring is that? So when the jam track kicks in, there's an organ, there's bass, there's all this stuff that's going on. I could have just played that, but that would have been very forgettable. So instead, we're going to look at some of these different voicings. Now, the strum pattern is key to this, and I'm holding the same strum pattern throughout the whole thing, which is just down, up, down, up, down, up. There's a shuffle to it, though. It's like that. It's not robotic. It's da 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 da. You can hear a little bit of a shuffle. I tend to do that a lot. That's just the way my right hand works. But anyway, so that's what's going on with the right hand, is that shuffle. And it's happening on the 16th note. So it's 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. So start with that. Just start with muting your strings and trying to get your right hand just comfortable so that you can play that. And you can slow that down. You can set the tempo if you want to play it slower. Now, I'm not going to go into all the up and down strokes when I go into this because it would be overwhelming, and honestly, I think I would lose a lot of people. However, I did put all of that in the tablature. So if you're a premium member, you've got the tab, you've got the upstrokes, the downstrokes, and you can see all the specifics of what I played. But I don't want you to get caught in that because every time I play this, I would do it a little different. The one thing I wouldn't do different is this. That's the consistent part of it. So just wanted to start with that. So don't like beat yourself up if you're trying to, is that an up or a down? Did he mute it here? You don't have to worry about that so much. You just have to try and you get the feel for it. It'll start to happen if you just kind of relax a little bit and let your right hand stay in motion. But anyway, it starts with a muted downstroke. So it actually did. So when we come in on the 1, that 1 is a muted downstroke. So it's 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. So that's what I'm doing there. Now the chord that I'm playing, it looks like a D chord. So if we think of our D chord down in first position, but we slide it all the way up here, we're actually playing a G chord. So my middle finger is on the 7th fret, my index finger. Now we're only playing those top 3 strings, but that's a G chord using the D chord shape. And this is going back to the CAGED thing, CAGED. You have to know CAGED as a guitar player. I'm just convinced that's the only way to really unlock the fretboard. I did a lesson on that, which was EP343. I plug that lesson all the time, but you can check that out if you want more information. But that's the G chord that we're starting with. And remember, we're starting with a muted downstroke, and the first thing that I play is in the upstroke. So it sounds like this. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm coming up here with my pinky to the 10th fret first string while I hold that chord down. Now that's just a variation of this G chord. So remember that. I mean, you've already got a tip here that you can apply right away to your rhythm playing. So if you're playing using that D chord shape, you can now reach up here. You can skip a fret from where your ring finger is. You skip the next fret, and then you come up here with your pinky. So that would work anywhere. We're down here, and we're playing an F. See, it works there as well. Okay, so let's get back to the G. Now, the other thing I should mention is where my pinky fell into place, I use that as a visual anchor if I want to go up to this voicing of that same chord. Light bulb that just went off for a lot of you. When you think about your G chord here using the D chord shape, your pinky can come up here and just feel your way to the next voicing. So that's the A chord shape out of CAGED. But if we're playing the top part of that A chord shape, that's that little triad that's making a G chord. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to just point that out. Okay, so from the beginning of this, we have, and then I did the slide in. Now that's another tip that you can apply right away to your, especially when you're using these triads. It's so easy to do. I'm just taking the chord, going down going down a fret, and then sliding back into it. And what I do there, I pick it, slide in, and then pick it again. That's the technique. And you can use that now anytime you're playing this chord shape. Right? Sounds pretty cool. And it just adds a nice little embellishment to the chord. Instead of just going. Okay, so after, then we go to the 5 chord, which is the D. And I played this triad. That's where I've got my index finger on the 5th fret, first string, and then these two fingers, ring and middle finger, are on the 7th fret, strings 2 and 3. And that's this D chord shape. So you can think of your A chord down in first position. If I were to play it up here, that chord shape, not the A chord, but the shape, and play the top part of that. That's how I break it down. And I have my own little method for CAGED, and I go over that in that lesson, that EP343, where I talk about the bottom part of the chord shape and the top part of the chord shape. I kind of separate those two, and I use them different. Now, a lot of people are able to have a bend here with their finger, where they're using their pinky or ring finger, and they can let that open string ring out, or the string behind this fret. I can't do that, so I have to cut them into two pieces. So I hit that D chord once, and then I came up here and went. Now this is where it starts to get very cool to me, because now we're getting away from the triads that we've been doing so far, those 3-note chords, and now we're getting into a harmonized third. A harmonized third is just 2 notes, and they're a third interval apart. That's really all it is, but they're... To do that, I'm coming up here to the 10th fret, 1st and 2nd string. I'm barring both of those with my index finger. And then I put my ring finger down on the 12th fret 2nd string, and then slide it up and go to the 13th fret 2nd string. So you have... Now, I could do a whole lesson on just that, just what happened there. Because, first of all, well, let's get to the headspace. So we played the D chord here, and this is where the song stays on the D chord. So when I came up here, I'm still in D-ville, or the cousin of a D chord, I guess. And so I'm thinking about the D chord shape here. If I were to do my full bar there, the major chord bar where I bar on the 10th fret, that would be my D chord. Now I can't make the full bar. It's actually kind of hard to bar that. But all I need to do is bar the first 2 strings on the 10th fret, which is the same fret where that full bar would be. And now I've got this little bluesy thing that I can do that gets into like a 7 chord. So if I was playing a D7, that's all I'm doing is I'm sort of hinting at or tracing the notes out of that 7 chord when I do that. And the reason I say that that's such a big thing is I use it all the time when I'm playing blues, or if I'm playing rhythm, to give all these kind of bluesy variations on what's going on. So hopefully you'll take that and start to use it right away in your playing. And like even for the G chord, you could start to, use it in other chords right away and start to feel how it works. And you see that it's super easy to do. It's not complicated at all. As long as you can visualize where it starts, and it's really off of that chord shape, then you've got that lick. All right, so let's back it up and play it from the beginning. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now after that, we're staying in the D chord. Remember, all of that's a D chord, and then we have, and this is also a D chord. Now what I'm doing here is I'm barring the first 3 strings on the 7th fret. My pinky goes back up to that 10th fret 1st string. That should look familiar, just like we did before. And then I come back and play the 7th fret, first 3 strings. Now what is this? Some of you are saying, how's that a D chord? Well, if you're looking at your D chord shape like this, or your D chord like this, that's using the A chord shape. But if I were to play the top 3 strings where my pinky is there, that's a D6 chord. And if you take a 6 chord and you slide it down 2 frets, you're playing a 9 chord. So that's a D6 and that's a D9. And the easy way to think about that is to just look at this chord shape. And I use this all the time when I'm playing. If I see this chord shape, I can see I've got 1 finger on the 5th fret, 1 finger on the 7th fret. And if I were to take that 7th fret and play the top 3 strings, I'm playing the 6th chord of that chord. And if I slide it down 2 frets where my index finger was, I'm playing the 9 chord. So now you can play these real bluesy, jazzy sounding, bluesy, somewhere in there, things that you can do where you can slide. And you hear that all the time. Right? But that's what that is. It's a D6 chord. But this is where I'm talking about the chord families. Even though it's not a D chord directly, and it's starting to sound different, it's still a family member. It's like a third cousin or something, but it's still part of that D family. It's got the D, and A. And so that's all I did is I hit that D6. Then I came back up here and did the embellishment off the D6, another light bulb, right? And then back to the G chord. That's where it goes back to the 1 chord. And I just played the bar there on the 3rd fret. In fact, when I play that chord, this is how I learned to do it. I play it like this, where I bar the first 2 strings on the 3rd fret. This is just my own little quirky way of doing it. But I've found that I've never needed that bass note. And some people can wrap their thumb over and play it that way. My hand's not big enough, so I've never been able to do that. So I just play 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And nobody's ever pointed anything out that sounds bad. So that's always worked for me. Okay, so that's the first little cycle through. Let me back up. I'll play through that slowly, and then we'll move on to the next part. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're going to go back to the G chord. So we ended on the G chord, and the song stays on the G chord. We go into this next part. And what I played here, now that's going to sound weird because that's not a G chord, that's an E minor chord. Right? It's an E minor. It's the top 3 strings out of an E minor triad there. But this is back to that family thing, and this is just something you're going to have to remember. An E minor chord is a G6 chord. So I've talked about this before, and every time I do it, I always hate to do it because I always get a lot of comments like, what? How does that work? But it's true, an E minor chord, if you play that on top of a G chord, so if I played an E minor with a G in the bass, I'm actually playing a G6 chord. The way that you can think about that as E minor is the relative minor of G. So you can take whatever your relative minor chord is of the chord you're playing, you can play a triad of that chord along with that chord, and you get the 6th chord. It's kind of weird, but it's true. And I don't want to get into the theory of it, but just trust me on that. So this E minor chord triad here is actually, when you're playing it along with a jam track, which has a G chord going on in the bass and the organ and everything, it ends up sounding like a G6. It's pretty cool. So it'll be like a 4th or 5th cousin, maybe. I don't know. But it's in the family. It's still in the G family. And that's all. What I'm doing to play that is I have my index finger on the 7th fret 1st string, 8th fret 2nd string, 9th fret 3rd string. You can think about this chord shape. That's your A minor chord shape, right? Play an A minor chord up here, bar it there, but we don't need the full chord like that. We just need the top 3 strings of it. So it's a little stair-step shape, and it's easy to find. And it slides as well. You can slide that just like we did the other. And your pinky goes back down on that 10th fret 1st string, just like we did before. Okay, and then I play this. So that's where the song goes from the G to the C. And why not make it interesting if you're going to go from one chord to the next? I just walked it down. And I'm playing the triads of those chords. So that's a G chord with that embellishment. Now this is another takeaway. You can take the G chord like this, put your pinky down. In this case it would be on the 8th fret 1st string. It's the same as like if you're doing the D sus4 chord. Same thing. In fact, that's a G sus4. We can slide that down 2 frets, and now we're playing an F. Pinky can do the same thing. This time it'd be on the 6th fret 1st string. And then we're back to this chord shape. It's the same as when we played the D chord, but now if we slide it down 2 frets, we're playing a C chord. So there's your C chord, the top part of your C shape, or that A shape out of CAGED, but we're playing the C chord. So that's the only place that there's another chord outside of G, C, and D, is where I threw in that little F. It's just sort of a transition chord, but I threw it in just because it sounded good. Anytime I'm going from here's my thought process there. Anytime I'm going from a G chord to a C, not anytime, but oftentimes, I'll go. Okay, let's back it up and play up to that point. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Okay, so now we're at the C part of the song. So now I played my C here. I'm gonna come up here and play it up here. There's my C chord, just like we did from the D to the D. We're doing the same thing here. So there's my C chord. If I were to play the full chord, I'm just gonna play the top 3 strings out of it. Bar these 2 on the 8th fret, and then I've got my middle finger on the 9th fret, 3rd string. And the way that I played it goes like this. So all I'm doing is I'm keeping the chord there, the triad. My pinky goes down on that 10th fret, 1st string again. And then watch this. Ah, okay, so I went from the C chord to the G chord. That's where the song goes from a C to a G. I played that for the C, played that for the G. Same exact thing. We just came down to your G chord. And then it goes to the D chord. And then back to your G. Now, how is that a D chord? Well, remember, I just explained that. You've got your D chord, there's your D6, and then that's your D9. So that is a D9. So going forward, anytime you see a D on a chord chart, you can do that and it'll sound like a D9. It'll have a different feel, and that's not going to work in everything, but most things that'll work. So you just have to kind of experiment, and you'll start to know this stuff by sound over time. And I did the same embellishment thing where this time I put my pinky on the 7th fret, 1st string, and then back down to your G chord to wrap it up. And that's how I ended that. I went G, back to that D that I just showed you, top 3 strings there on the 5th fret, and then back to your G chord. That's actually the D9. And look at that. This is another little sidebar here, a takeaway. But anytime I'm playing off of this chord shape, I can rock back and forth between the 1 and the 4 chord. Now that's a 9 chord, that's a D9, but listen to how cool that sounds. And let's do it in a 1, 4, 5. Here's your 5. That's a free lesson right there, a lesson within a lesson. But but even that is a nice derivation from just playing, right? Look at that. Going up to that chord shape, it's the D chord shape, but I'm playing the G chord. Ah, another light bulb just went off. Right? So you start to see how all of this stuff fits together. It's just using the same shapes. But that's what we've got for this first part. I'm going to save the rest for the second part. Obviously, if you're a premium member, you have the jam track, which I have in 2 tempos, so you can take all of this stuff and practice putting it into the jam track, and it's so much fun to play along with a full band when you start to see these chord things come to life. So let me back up. I'll play through it one more time, and then I'll see you in part 2 for the rest of this. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a